Today we're going to be talking about the subject of sexual abuse. Most of the material we're going to be talking about here comes from a book called The Wounded Heart. The Wounded Heart was written actually as a response to a need. As we see the history of this, we're going to find out that in the past this hasn't been seen as a very difficult or great problem, so most counselors were never even trained in this area. And so the author had people come in wanting to deal with sexual abuse, and he had to say, I have no training, I don't know anything about this. Will you tell me about it? And so this was all derived directly from clients that were victims of childhood sexual abuse. What does the population look like? It's very high among those in therapy. In other words, you're going to see a lot of people coming in with messed up marriages, and when you dig to the bottom of it, it's going to be the characteristics that we're going to be looking at today. And you're going to find a lot of those marriages are very distant, that the woman isn't really attached very much, or the woman hasn't fallen in love with her husband and says she's not in love, because all the defenses, many times the defenses in sexual abuse are more destructive than the abuse itself. And we're going to see that and why that happens. It's 60% higher in the lower class than in the middle class. For females, 11 to 22% have been sexually abused. Some studies show as high as 38%. So if you think about it, approximately a third of all women have been sexually abused and are going to have these kind of dynamics in the counseling that you're dealing with here. Males is about 5 to 9% of males have been sexually abused. 60% were forced or threatened by the offender. Some earlier studies have even higher rates, but they weren't that precise. Incest, of course, is another major problem that we're dealing with here. And there were major changes in this between about 1960 and 1961. But it still is going to have the same kind of dynamics, only just more severe. What are the dynamics of abuse? Let's think of them first at different levels. Let's start with the most minimal type of abuse and move up. Verbal interaction, sexual comments, interactions, or seduction. Next level would be exposure to sexual stimulus, like pornography or actual sex. Then psychological sexual abuse erodes the child-adult boundary. Many times we call this emotional incest. What are we talking about? The mother takes the child as an example and tells her all about the sex life with the dad, or takes all her emotions, uses the child to try to basically process her own struggles and so on. That's a level of sexual abuse. Less severe sexual abuse would be sexual kissing, touching with the clothes on. Severe sexual abuse, unclothed contact, touching, penetration, breast contact, simulated intercourse. Of course, very severe sexual abuse is intercourse, oral or anal sex. The level of the abuse, the amount of damage it does, is usually to the extent it disrupts the protection and the nurturance of the parental bond. Therefore, incest is the most damaging type there is. Now why? Because you have this relationship. What's the relationship supposed to look like? The parent is protecting the child. But instead, the parent is abusing the child. Do you think that might cause a little bit of feelings of powerlessness, a little bit of ambiguity and problems in the relationship in the area of trust? What are some of the strategies of abuse? The most usual one is the development of intimacy and secrecy. Physical contact that appears appropriate. And then finally, sexual abuse proper. The person ends up with betrayal, powerlessness, ambivalence. Why ambivalence? Because I'm part of it. Usually the kids that are being abused are targets because they're needy. They didn't really have a father, or they didn't connect to their father. They're really looking for that connection, or no one really cares for them. They feel bad, and the perpetrator does what? Provides that caring, provides that being special, meets the needs that aren't being met. And of course, does sex feel good? Yes, it can. And so the whole feelings on one side, this is good, this is wonderful, my needs are being met. But on the other side, they sort of know, there's something wrong here. And so it usually happens. They end up blaming themselves. Well, I didn't, the lady who's been abused from age 3 to 18. Why didn't she say anything? Because her needs were met on this side. And she was giving this to get that. And so they blame themselves. They have all sorts of problems that way. What are the factors involved? There are a lot of different reasons, but why does the perpetrator get involved in this kind of thing? Sometimes they're isolated, unsatisfactory married sex, marital discord, role reversal. What does that mean? In the family, you've got a mom or a wife that is very inadequate. And in codependency, the first daughter takes over from mom. And so it seems like the daughter is more like the wife than the wife is. The wife becomes the child becomes the mom. In systems theory, that's one of the theories. Dependent, powerless wife. Mentally or physically ill wife. Sex punitive or an abusive mother. Family dysfunction, alcoholism, seductive child. This is the way they think about it. You see, a lot of those things are not really valid, are they? Now, they used to think they were. Now, what are types of abusers first? Then I'll talk about the history. First, most abusers are using sex as a drug to resolve their own personal internal problems. Sexual addiction. Bases of sexual addiction are pornography, fantasy, and masturbation. That again are doing what? Meeting the needs. It's like a drug, meeting the needs of that person, and it's an addictive drug. Interesting enough, most abusers, the majority are married or previously married. Then we call pedophilia. This is when the abuse is a child, someone under the age of 16 or 18, depending on which state you're in. Here it's 16. In Kansas, the rule is that the age of legal consent for sex is 16. So it'd be a child below that, and usually we're considering that there's a significant difference in age. But in these particular patterns, we have different ones. The first type of pedophile is called pattern. They repeat with deviant arousal for children. In other words, they're targeted toward children. Episodic, meaning that these particular ones, every so often they do it. It's like an episode, then they don't have any problems for a while. Regressed, primarily sexual attraction to age mates, including adequate sexual functioning, situational and alcohol-related, onset in adulthood. That's what we call regress. In other words, this is a fairly normal person, but they have an opportunity and they do it with a child. But they're not focused on a child. The one we're really concerned about, and the major one here that you're going to see is the biggest problem, is what's called fixated. A fixated pedophile is one, it's premeditated, regardless of stress, identifies with children, little age-mate contact, immature, inadequate personalities, onset in teenage. And many times what you have is some abuse or something occurred. Many times they've been abused and they stop growing at that age. To them, messing around with children is like playing doctor. And many times they have a particular age range. That's when they got abused or when they stopped growing. Do you see what I'm saying? So if you see somebody and they really don't have any adult friends and they're always trying to do stuff with children and they act sort of like children, watch out. Because those are the signs of a fixated pedophile. Now at the end of this class we're going to have an entire session just on treatment of pedophiles, okay? So we're not going to go into that as much detail. But let's look at the history for a second. Because it hasn't always been the case that we realized how damaging this was and how much of a problem this was of what we're dealing with here. In history, the idea was that the victim was definitely somewhat to blame. Most offenses occur between to girls, particularly between age 8 and 12. Now why? Because between that age, that is when the girl is learning to connect to the father. So there's a desire here to have some sort of connection there, and of course the abuser can take advantage of that. 1962, listen to this, 1962. The majority of pedophiles are harmless individuals, and their victims are usually known to be aggressive and seductive children. That's 1962. Kinsey thought pedophiles did little harm, and sexual abuse did little harm. There's a lot of confusion in the research here of mixing the later results with the causes. And many times the victim gets blamed of what? They didn't stop. They should have just reported it and there wouldn't have been any problem. Remember the ambivalence I talked about. That's going on, the confusion that's going on there. From that stage they went on, the next one is blaming mother. It's all the mother's fault. They used to blame mothers for not preventing it. They would see it as active encouragement, indirect responsibility due to withholding sex, failure to set limits, or denying the knowledge of it. Are sometimes mothers to blame? Yes, they can be. But the idea is blaming other people. Blaming the family system. Well, it's the family system that was messed up. Incest data. 44% had also abused unrelated females and 11% males. 18% had raped. 59% began in teenage. See, if that's true, can we really say, well, it's just this particular marriage? And that's not the case. The problem is that abuse is a trap. And once you get caught into it, it sort of just sucks you in and it's very hard to get out of it. The first trap is you see the abuser as the enemy. If the abuser is the enemy, then you end up losing relationships and maybe even end up, for women, being a man-hater. Well, that's what men are like, and you just go and blame all men. What if you try to forget? What happens? You bury all of this stuff. You focus. You end up focusing on the abuser if you try to forget. You go around saying, I'm not going to remember, I'm not going to remember, I'm not going to remember. And what does that do? Reminds you to remember. The biggest one is the commitment to never be hurt again. I've been hurt, I feel powerless, this will never happen to me again. And when you do that, what happens? You put yourself into a trap of deadness for the rest of your life. Because in order to make it never happen again, what can you not have? A healthy relationship. So therefore it causes tremendous damage. It ends up in broken relationships, loneliness, eating disorders, sexual promiscuity, sexual coldness, frightening rage. See, the problem is, if you get this idea, this is a very usual one, the most usual one that we see. Here's the problem, okay? You have these needs, right? Because maybe your needs didn't get met as a kid. And because of these needs, you were really looking for someone to help you, to love you, to care for you. So what caused you to get abused? From the abused person's point of view, it was my needs. It was my neediness. It was my longings to have a relationship, to care, for someone to care for me. That's what got me abused, right? Well, therefore, the solution is really easy. I will never allow myself again to really care for anyone, because then I won't get sucked in and I won't get abused, right? But actually that backfires into an ongoing trap. The trap is this. If that lady meets a good, healthy man that really would love her and meet her needs in a healthy way, what fear is she going to have? That she might really fall for him, and if she fell for him, she might be vulnerable, and if she was vulnerable, she could get hurt again, right? So when she meets healthy men from now on, what's she going to do? Run. Who is she going to connect to? Unhealthy men who she knows she'll never fall for, so therefore they seem safer to her than the healthy guy. And so she goes from distant man to distant man, from abuser to abuser, over and over and over again, getting hurt over and over and over again. And every time she does, what does she say to herself? I can't allow myself to care. I can't be vulnerable. And she ends up basically living a life of shallow relationships, doesn't she? And she never gets the needs met that were at the bottom of this whole thing of being needy in the first place. Instead of just meeting her needs. Another thing that happens is contempt. Now, what is contempt? Contempt is not just being angry at somebody, it's degrading somebody with what you do. And contempt is a method of blame shifting. Remember what I said is that the tendency is for the victim, and realize a lot of these victims are still in the concrete period of development, so what do they believe? Everything is caused by them. So therefore the reason this happened is I must have done something. Or if you don't like that one, the reason this happened, I was too naive. The reason this happened was I just wanted to be loved. And so they're very ashamed. How do people deal with shame? I'm just going to use a little example here. Let's just say you're sitting in the congregation, and right in the middle of the sermon, the pastor stops and says, quit picking your nose. How do you feel? Do you feel some shame if you're picking your nose? Now, how are you going to react? You can react several ways, and everything you're doing is to deflect the shame. You could say, Pastor, you pick your nose too, I saw you. Or you could say, you're right, Pastor, I'm no good. I'm just rotten. Do you see how you deflected from the shame of the real situation of picking your nose? Now we're talking about your problems, and yeah, I'm a sinner just saved by grace, or whatever. Do you see, all these things are attempts to escape the shame instead of dealing with the shame. And so a lot of abused people, what do you get? They have low self-worth, they're beating themselves up, it was my fault, I'm stupid. And no matter how many times the counselor tells them, over and over and over again, many times it doesn't really get down in their heart. I was teaching Theophostic at one point, and we were working with this particular lady. She said, don't work with me, it doesn't work. And we finally got it, and Jesus said to her, it wasn't your fault. And she broke down crying and just said, it wasn't my fault, it wasn't my fault, it wasn't my fault. She'd been told that numerous times, but see, she never really believed it. And now that it became a revelation to her, that changed everything. As long as you hold on to your shame, and you believe it's your fault, you're going to do these kind of things. See, contempt means, I'm going to put you down. I'm going to put all men down. All men just act from their lower anatomy. I had a client say that to me, who had been sexually abused. But do you see, that's contempt. And many times it's generalized contempt. A lot of abusers become man-haters. But do you see why they're doing that? It's not just the abuse, it's the way they're protecting themselves from the shame. What's another function of contempt? It heads off intimacy. Remember, what am I afraid of? I don't want to be intimate, I don't want to be close. And it affects a lot of different people, different ways. Remember this one very heavy lady that I was talking to, happened to be a friend of my wife's. She said, the reason I'm so heavy is I was raped. And I said to myself, it's never going to happen again. To her, men aren't interested in heavy ladies, so that's her defense. You see how the defenses come across? All these things happen in the person's life as a way of protecting themselves from the feelings of powerlessness. See, when you're raped, when you're abused by somebody older than you that you feel you can't stop, how do you feel? Powerless. How many of you like to feel powerless? Will you figure out ways and methods to make yourself feel powerful by building defenses, by building walls that then keep you locked in? Contempt can deaden your longings. It gives you an illusion of control. There's one particular client, I mean, she had so much contempt, her sarcasm was just like a knife. And she would never, her husband had an addiction, and she would just put her husband down, and he would just put up with it. Over and over again. But see, why was she doing that? Again, she was taking some responsibility for the addiction. She should be able to fix him. She was unable to fix him, so she attacked him. It's just all methods. It distorts the real problem. The real problem is, I was abused. Can we just accept that and realize that that might just be a part of life? But no, the real problem is those people out there. The real problem is that world out there. The real problem is this person didn't protect me. What is the main damage of the abuse? The main damage is that feeling of powerlessness. And it can go a number of different ways. You say, well, why in the world would a person that got sexually abused end up being promiscuous? The formula sort of gets broken. Here's what the formula is supposed to be. In a person that's not been abused, the formula is, I have needs, I get in a healthy relationship with someone who loves me, I marry them, we have sex, it puts us together as one flesh. How about abuse? What does it look like? I have needs, I meet someone who says they care about me, they use me and treat me like an object and trash me. Now where do I go? Well, if you want to get your needs met, I guess you got to sleep with everybody on the block, right? One lady put it this way. Why should I resist? They're just going to run me over anyway. They'll just bulldoze me anyway. and I'll just get hurt more. I just as well agree. She came in with a page and a half of all the men she slept with. Not because she wanted to, not because she cared, but because she just saw life that way. You're just powerless. You got to just let them do whatever you want them to do. And of course, to do that, she had to get out and get drunk out of her mind every weekend so she wouldn't feel anything. You have this whole helplessness, relentless pain of the soul. A lot of drugs get used, a lot of alcohol and so on, to kill the pain here. Despair, learned helplessness. Can't do anything about it. A sense of loss. A person can even lose their identity. Re-victimization. Interesting little study. It says that women that have been raped have a 200% higher chance of being raped again. And this is like people jump out of the bushes and grab you type of rape. Why do you think that's the case? Because how they feel about themselves. Let me tell you, are you going to go after some lady that is looking down, she just can't have it, you know what I mean? Or are you going to go after some lady that looks like she's got a 38 in her purse? You know. They see the self as inadequate due to how they've been treated, and they fail to change the relationship. Next is betrayal. What is betrayal? Betrayal has to do with when you think somebody is on your side, but they come after you. Think of the Iraq War. We send a troop over there. He's one of our troops. And he joins the Al-Qaeda and shoots at us. How do we feel? Betrayed. Betrayed. How about a kid when either your parents didn't protect you, and by the way, in sexual abuse, many times there's more anger at the parent that didn't protect them than there is at the abuser. See, if your mom knew or should have known, or if your mom forced you to go over and stay with Uncle Jeff, and had some idea that Uncle Jeff has these problems, but they needed a babysitter and they couldn't find one, and you got abused. See, how does that feel? It's when somebody is supposed to be on your side, and they either complicit, meaning that they sort of knew what was going on and did nothing, or what else? You bring it up to them, and what do they say? Oh no, that didn't happen. Quit making up lies. They take the side of the abuser. Many times what? They're afraid they're going to lose the abuser will go to prison, or they'll lose out some way in life if they admit this. A lot of families, when the abuse is brought up, totally go in denial, and the person that was abused gets ostracized. How does that feel? You were supposed to be on my side. You're my mom. You're my relatives. This happened to me, and you won't admit it, you won't protect me, and you won't do what's necessary to deal with it. What's the cost of this particular problem? Hypervigilance. If you had that experience, what are you going to think about life? What's the next words coming out of your mouth? I can't trust anyone. I got to take care of myself. I got to watch out for everybody, don't I? Suspiciousness. I didn't see it coming. Anybody could do it, right? Make a lot of good friendships that way, right? Distortion or denial. You warp things, you make up things, you see things that are not there, or you miss things that are there. You lose hope that you could ever stop it, or that you'll ever get justice for the situation. As I said, some clients just sort of throw up their hands and, well, They end up in relationships where they just allow their mates to bulldoze them all the time in every area. And sometimes they just throw up their hands and say, okay, whatever you want. But what happens? The bitterness builds up from the wind loses till the marriage dissolves. The third one is ambivalence. Talked a little bit about this. This is where it's very confusing because there was good and there was bad. How many people do you know that are all bad? How many people do you know that are all good? Well, that's what we tend to do in our own. One of the reactions is to see the abuser as all bad, see the defender as all good. What are you going to do when the defender abuses you? Remember this one particular lady? Very small lady married this great big hulking guy. And why do you think she did? He's going to protect me, right? What do you do then if he becomes domestically violent or abusive? When your security guard that you hired is attacking you. The two contradictory emotions at the same time. See, the desire to be wanted, the desire to get my needs met, with the contempt and the fear that I'm going to be hurt again. Many times they make up their minds, I will never feel again. The worst case I ever had of that was a lady who had been sexually abused by her dad, incest, for all of her life. What was interesting is there's a letter after his death in which he was sent to his wife saying, oh, my eldest daughter enjoyed it. That's how much denial he was. But how did she defend herself? She decided she had no needs and she had no emotions. So she didn't. When I got her for counseling, this is how she operated. She had to be hyper vigilant like we talked about because she couldn't react. She would watch a room. If everybody laughed, she left. Because she totally cut off her emotions, totally cut off, told herself she had no needs, so she basically didn't function. But she was protecting herself, don't you understand? That's what I'm saying. The protections many times are much more detrimental than actually what happened in the first place. Although we're not discounting that at all. Fear of pleasure. Hatred of longing. Compulsivity. The addictions that kill the pain. Robs the joy of life. And messes up marriages like you can't believe. Secondary damage. Either they deny the abuse or they minimize it, or they bury it. Depression. Sexual dysfunction. Physical complaints. Many times people have been sexually abused, that they have different physical complaints that they in their life. Self-esteem. Strong self-contempt. And then finally, style of relating. How do these people relate to other people? There's sort of three basic styles. And you can pick this up. The first one they call the good girl. The good girl has self-contempt. She turns everything on herself. It was my fault if I just wasn't so naive, if I just wasn't so needy, if I protected myself better, if I wasn't so stupid, because if I'm just good enough, if I just act nice enough to everybody, then they'll take care of me and I'll be all right, right? Sure. Then we have the tough girl. This is other contempt. See, first person blames themselves. The tough girl blames everybody else. All those men are a gun shot. That's all they want. They never care about you. You can't trust anybody. Everyone's against you. they going to react in life? Anything that goes wrong, they're going to blame other people. Party girl. That's the combination. That's ambivalent contempt. They don't look like it, but they're easygoing, inconsistent combination of self and other contempt, paradoxical, unstable, fickle, seductive, chronic dissatisfaction. So these things significantly affect the entire person's life, don't they? And they cause all sorts of problems. So let's sort of sum this all up of what we're looking at. This particular lecture, we're dealing with the problem, okay? We're not dealing with the solutions. Next time we'll deal with the solutions, okay? Here's sort of the problem. These are the options. You can ensure it will never happen again. And we already talked about how the self-protection all works and that kind of stuff. And what does it do? See, I got a solution for you all. I can guarantee you're never going to be shot at again. Live the rest of your life in an Abrams tank. And keep all the lids shut at all times. And that's the closest you get to anyone. You never will allow anyone into your tank. Isn't that going to solve all your problems? Isn't that going to make your life good and wonderful? Attack the need which made me vulnerable. This is the second one. And many times a lot of abused people blame God, don't they? Well, where was God? Why didn't God intervene? What was going on there? And just like they blame the mom or the dad for not protecting them, they blame God for not arbitrarily intervening and stopping the abuse. Third one, they can attack themselves. They say, I realize I should have done better, that I'm uncouth, that I'm dirty, that I should be excluded from the church, and they beat themselves up to try to make themselves do better. The next one is to attack the abuser. Try and take their shame, how they're feeling about themselves, and put it all on the abuser. The abuser is totally evil, should not exist on the face of the earth, and should be executed in every way. Attack the protector. Make them take the shame. You see, all of this is taking the shame and we're displacing it on different people, aren't we? And all of it is a deflection type of thing. Next one. Admit that I'm a fool. I was selfish. I thought I wouldn't get caught. I was suckered. I was powerless. I cannot take care of myself. What's the last one? Maybe I can take responsibility for the whole situation. I need to grieve the loss. This really happened to me. It's not all these other people's fault. It's not really my fault. Yes, there's some fault here, but that's their problem. I got to deal with myself. And I'm going to have to choose to live again. Life is that way. If you're vulnerable, you can be hurt. But I've got to take a chance. If I'm going to live again, either I'm going to be dead or I'm going to be alive. Those are my only two choices. And of course, ultimately, can I trust God? Can I rely on Him? Can He bring healing? Can I process this? Can I deal with the issues in my marriage? Can I love again? Now, I need to not be stupid and put myself in a situation where I'm going to get hurt. But I have to be able to judge. I have to be able to grow. I have to be able to live again. And that's the challenge of recovery. Most of the people you see in your counseling are going, if they've been sexually abused, you may not even realize. It's one of the, you always have to ask this question. Because these dynamics just flow down in the entire personality and what is going on and how they treat other people. Many times they're not going to see themselves as they're a tough girl. But what are you going to see in a marriage? They're overly critical. They won't get close. They expect other people to meet their needs and take care of them. There's all sorts of dynamics and problems that underlie this. But the thing is to sort it out, try and get these pieces, and then work it through and bring some healing. And that's what we'll talk about next week. Let's pray. Lord, we know that you are not the author of evil, and that it is Satan, and is needy people who use other people to try and get their needs met, and that people get hurt in life. But Lord, we know that you are the answer, and that you love us and you accept us the way we are, that you took your shame upon the cross, that you love us the way we are, and you forgive us for all that we've done. And Lord, that you want us to forgive and to help and to accept other people like they are. And we ask, Lord, that you would help us to be able to help people that have been hurt in this way to become healthy again and to live again. In Jesus' name.